Today on the Bible Reading Challenge podcast, we are going to give an overview of the book of Isaiah. My name is Aaron Ventura, and I'm joined today by Pastor Doug Wilson. Pastor Doug, welcome back to the show.
Hi.
Well, we are in a very long book. How many chapters are in Isaiah?
60 what? I don't know. 66?
66. So, is there a book with more chapters besides Psalms than? I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Yeah, so Psalms, you got 150 chapters, but Isaiah is a long one, and a lot of people really have no idea what is happening in this book.
Right.
So can you just start by sketching when did this happen, who is Isaiah, and why is this book so important?
Okay, so I'll begin with why it's so important. If you look at all the Old Testament quotations that are found in the New Testament, one of the things that it identifies is the favorite books. What were the apostles' and favorite books? What were Jesus' favorite books?
Yeah.
Just by number of citations. And there were four. There were Genesis, Deuteronomy, Psalms, and Isaiah.
Yeah.
So Isaiah is heavily quoted in the New Testament. Mm-hmm. So if you just became a Christian and you became a Christian because your doctor told you have 2 years to live,
yeah,
and you're trying to make up for lost time and read your Bible, how can I fit in a lifetime of learning?
Yeah,
I want to read and reread and reread the New Testament, but where should I concentrate in the Old Testament? I would say concentrate in Genesis, Deuteronomy, Psalms, and Isaiah.
Yeah.
Isaiah, and out of those four, Isaiah is the most challenging.
Yeah.
And it's challenging because it doesn't have a narrative arc. Mm-hmm. Right. You know, it's basically a collection of 3 books.
Yeah.
And Isaiah's style is very high. Mm-hmm. And then couple that with the fact that much of it is poetry. Mm-hmm. So you've got poetry at a very high rhetorical level.
Yeah.
Many readers don't feel like they have a necklace; they feel like they have a box of pearls.
Yeah.
And this is glorious, but how does it? Where does it go?
Yeah.
Or where is it fulfilled, and so on. So Isaiah himself. So the book of Isaiah is written. Probably the best way to think of it is it straddles the year 700 BC. Mm-hmm. So Isaiah had a ministry, probably actually extended ministry.
Yeah,
like
50 years.
50, 60 years. There's a mention of Sennacherib in the book, and Sennacherib we know died in like 681.
Yeah.
And then, so let's say 40 to 60 years. Well, I'd say probably 50 to 60 years.
Yeah.
Straddling the year 700.
Okay.
Isaiah is highly educated. He's probably, he may even have been a member of the royal family. Yeah. Probably
the king's nephew.
Yeah, king's nephew, and so royal family, but or an aristocrat, mm-hmm. A courtier at any rate, someone who is lived in palaces,
yeah.
Not like Elijah or John the Baptist living out in the wilderness, but according to Jewish tradition, and I think this is probably accurate. He was martyred under King Manasseh, mm-hmm. and was sawn in two. Mm-hmm. And there's a reference to that without using Isaiah's name in Hebrews 11.
Yeah.
So when it's referring to some were sawn in two, that's a reference almost certainly to the death of Isaiah.
Yeah. So when people are reading this, so if you're going through the Bible Reading Challenge, you're going to read Isaiah, and then you're going to read the book of Kings. And just for reference, so 2 Kings 15 to 21 and 2 Chronicles 26 to 33, those are going to give you the histories of what's happening in the kingdom, who are the kings of that time. Right. And so it might be worthwhile to read that, and then that'll help give you the context. At the same time, there is kind of 3 different audiences almost.
Right.
You mentioned it's basically 3 books together.
3 sections.
You want to walk through those 3 divisions, and let's talk about them.
Yeah, so one of the things that liberal commentators do, or this is not the the benchmark of liberalism. But one of the things that is more common on the liberal side of things is to attribute it to three authors.
Yeah.
You know, like there's an Isaianic school rather than an Isaiah.
Yeah.
But that's saying that men of great genius are limited to one style only, so that they never confuse future commentators.
Right.
The fact that Isaiah might have three different groups that he's writing to, or three different genres that he wants to work in. For my favorite example on this would be the Scottish Presbyterian theologian Samuel Rutherford. If you read his letters, the letters of Samuel Rutherford, they are exalted, devotional, pastoral, just wonderful, wonderfully edifying. You could read them devotionally. And then you read Rutherford, same man, Lex Rex. It's tight, turgid, dense, theological, political reasoning.
Yeah.
And it'd be very easy for someone 500 years from now to say this clearly didn't come from the same man.
Right.
Well, it clearly, but we know that it did.
Yeah.
So Isaiah, I think, is in the same boat. So first 40 chapters, or that first chunk of first 2/3 of the book would be one section. Then there's this glorious stretch, chapter 40 on the second section. Boy, I think Isaiah's purposes were different, and I think that if you are reading the book, if you should read the book as sort of a library or the collected essays of Isaiah, instead of trying to make a thread.
Yeah.
And I think if you try to make a thread, then you're going to be grasping at straws, and then
the kind of a lot of the commentators, the traditional outline is like 1 to 39, and they'd say that's kind of the context is his own lifetime. He's prophesying of Assyria is the dominant threat, and then 40 to 55 would be more maybe about the Babylonian exile to come, and it's aimed at those Jews who are in exile.
And if you do what you said earlier and read the history, Isaiah is worried about the rise of Babylon.
Yeah.
Babylon is just this little thing on the horizon.
Yep.
During Isaiah's ministry.
Yeah, and then finishes off 56 to 66. Some would say it's aimed at the exiles who've returned from Babylon, and there's this expectation for this faithful remnant and the Messiah.
And the reason I said liberals tend to want to break it all up, like Deutero, Isaiah, and so on, is because a big problem for them is fulfilled prophecy.
Right. He couldn't have.
Isaiah couldn't have written the whole thing.
Yeah.
Because some of the fulfillments of these prophecies are uncanny.
Yeah.
Right.
So let's actually go there. So this is the prophecy of Cyrus is the big one here.
Right.
So this is Isaiah 44 verse 28 is where it starts, and it goes through 45 verse 13. I'll just read verse 28. So this is Isaiah prophesying, and this is about 150 years before Cyrus comes to power. It says, "Who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and he shall perform all my pleasure, saying to Jerusalem, you shall be built, and to the temple, your foundation shall be laid." So this is prior to the destruction of the temple, and it's prophesying a coming rebuild of the temple. So let's talk about this. How are we supposed to understand this?
Well, my understanding is that Isaiah was what people call a prophet.
a seer of the future.
A seer of the future. That's and one of the things that Isaiah himself does later on, I've forgotten the reference, but I think it's later in the book, where he's taunting the pagan gods. And one of the things he says to them is, show us the things that are to come hereafter, so that we may know that you are gods.
Yeah.
Right? So this is, and in Deuteronomy, one of the tests of a prophet. Deuteronomy 13, a true prophet won't lead you after other gods. Deuteronomy 18, if a man prophesies and what he prophesies doesn't come to pass, don't worry about that guy. Right? So one of the marks, one of the calling cards of a true prophet is that he can tell you what's going to happen. Right? So when Saul's looking for the donkeys and and Samuel tells him,
Yeah.
what's going to happen. Don't worry, the donkeys have been found. And that's what a seer does.
Yeah.
Right.
He just poured some oil on my head. Not sure why. He said I'm going to be king. How do I know that this is legit?
How do I know? Yeah. So basically, and then when you look at a passage like Isaiah 53, which is under every scenario, Isaiah 53 is written before Jesus.
Yeah.
700 years before Jesus.
Yeah.
Even if you dated it as one of the later Isaiahs, it's still centuries before Jesus.
Yeah.
And I want to know, who's that guy? Who did that? Because Isaiah 53 is an uncanny description.
Yeah. The Jews don't want to read it. It's too specific.
They don't read it in the synagogue.
Yeah.
Right.
One of the things I was looking up, so Josephus talks about how Cyrus comes across, the scroll from Isaiah is left, and he reads the Isaiah scroll, reads his name, it says what he's going to do, and then he goes and does it, and this ends up being how Reformation happens. And then I was looking up Calvin, and he mentions how both Jeremiah and Isaiah have these pretty terrible prophetic jobs, in that you're going to go prophesy for longer than most men are in the ministry for, and they're not going to listen to you.
Nobody's going to pay attention.
And yet God is going to use this the big book that he wrote to bring about the greatest Reformation and return. Just talk about how that should encourage us when we're feeling like we're sowing, no fruit, planting, no fruit, and yet trusting the providence of God.
Yeah, so I'd go back to the reference to Isaiah in Hebrews 11, where it says some of the heroes of the faith from all over the Old Testament, some of them received their dead back to life, some of them conquered armies, some of them stopped the mouths of lions, and it's sort of right-handed victory. It's victory that looks like victory, victory that feels like victory to us. And the Old Testament is full of David and Goliath stories like that. We've got those stories, but we also have the people who are on the run, the people who, like Isaiah, who were martyred, the people who, like Jeremiah, who had all his prophecies come true in a melancholy way, and like Cassandra, people don't believe him. Right? He's just not believed. So. And it says in Hebrews 11 that these people hiding in caves and wandering on the earth, it says, of whom the world was not worthy. Yeah. So God values the people who trust him to the point of seeing immediate results. But he also values those who trust him, although there are no immediate results at all.
Yeah. Well, while we're on this kind of theme of prophecy, I thought we'd go to Isaiah 7 and talk about a kind of a troubling passage for some in terms of understanding single fulfillment, double fulfillment. How is prophecy fulfilled and confirmed? So this is the famous kind of Emmanuel prophecy about the virgin, starting verse 10. It says, moreover, the Lord spoke again to Ahaz, saying, ask a sign for yourself from the Lord your God. Ask it either in the depth or in the height above. And Ahaz is too pious to ask for a sign. God gives him one anyways. And then it says in verse 14, therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. Curds and honey he shall eat, that he may know how to refuse the evil and choose the good. For before the child shall know how to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land that you dread will be forsaken by both her kings. And then it actually extends on through chapter 8 as well. Sure. So how do you understand this prophecy, and are the Christians ripping this out of context to suddenly mean, oh, this refers to Jesus, when it actually is Mahar Shalal Hashbaz,
Right. So there's several things about this. One, are there double fulfillments in Scripture? And the answer is yes. Every instance of typology is here. This represents its own situation itself, or something coming up, and then something in the distant future. So here are the reasons for taking this in a double fulfillment sense. One is if this was about Jesus only, it's only about Jesus, then it doesn't really help Ahaz that much.
Right.
Right? So because the whole import of the prophecy is before this boy is gotten to it. He can eat curds and honey when he knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good.
Yeah.
So basically, when he gets to a certain age,
Yeah.
by the time he gets to a certain age, the countries that you're so worried about are going to be dead and gone.
Yeah.
Right. And if that's 700 years in the future, then Ahaz will say, "Well, duh."
Yeah.
Of course, they'll be dead and gone. So will the rest. So will the rest of us be. You're not helping me.
Yeah.
Right. So it clearly has to have some sort of relevance for Ahaz.
Yeah.
Okay. And the word for virgin there is ambiguous. It's Alma. In Hebrew, it's Alma, and that means virgin or young woman.
Yeah.
All right. So a young wife is easily described as an Alma. Isaiah, if it's referring to Isaiah's son or the prophetess, Alma would perfectly be descriptive.
Yeah.
If he had a young bride who was not a virgin, but who was there and who was capable of bearing a child,
Yeah.
who would be 5 or 6, and these countries are going to be out of the picture.
Yeah.
So there's that. But then on the flip side, years later, centuries later, when the Old Testament Hebrew is translated into Greek by the rabbis. This is before Jesus, before the wise men, before anything. The Jews translated this passage into Greek, and Alma was rendered by them as Parthenos. And Parthenos means virgin, 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 nothing but virgin.
Yeah.
It can only mean virgin. So centuries before Christ, it was received among the Jews that a virgin was going to conceive.
Yeah.
Right? And then, of course, to clinch it for Christians, this is quoted in the New Testament.
Yeah.
And applied to Jesus.
Yeah, and in Isaiah 8:18, Isaiah says, "Here am I, and the children whom the Lord has given me. We are for signs and wonders in Israel from the Lord of hosts who dwells in Mount Zion." And so that would support this idea that there is this near anticipatory fulfillment pointing to, and then the Jews are saying, yeah, of course that's what happened, but there's still something more to come on this prophecy. Okay, so let's hit a few of your favorite passages or any sections that you really wanted to hit from the greatest hits of Isaiah.
All right. One of the things one of the passages that I appreciate the most in terms of the richness of it, what profit is there in doing a close study of how the New Testament handles the Old Testament.
Yeah.
One of my favorite places is Isaiah 28. Okay. And in Isaiah 28, you have it says.
Talking about verse 11.
Yes, for by people of strange lips and with a foreign tongue, the Lord will speak to this people, to whom it is said, to whom he has said, "This is rest, give us rest for the weary, and this is repose." Yet they would not hear. And the word of the Lord will be to them, precept upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line, here a little, there a little, that they may go and fall backward and be broken and snared and taken. So one of the things, first, there's the importance of contextual Bible study. There are many Christians who think, well, precept upon precept, line upon line, that's how you're to study the Bible. Well, only if you want to be broken, snared, and captured.
That's one option.
That's one option. If you want to be broken, snared, and captured, okay. What's happening is the people are mocking Isaiah. Isaiah's explaining what's going to happen to them, and they're neenering him.
Yeah.
Who's he trying to teach? To children just weaned? That's verse 9. To whom will he teach knowledge, and to whom will he explain the message? To those who are weaned from the milk, those taken from the breast? For it is precept on precept. So they're sing-songing back to Isaiah.
Yeah.
You're treating us like little Sunday school kids.
Yeah.
Who do you think you are, teaching us line on line, precept on precept, spelling it out in big letters?
Yeah.
And then Isaiah says, all right, have it your way then. With people of strange lips and strange tongues, I will, since you're not able to handle the simple ABCs that I'm giving you, then maybe maybe you'll understand my prophecy when you hear Babylonian soldiers speaking in your streets in a language you don't understand.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, the thing that's interesting about this, and is really fascinating, is that Paul quotes this in 1 Corinthians when he's talking about the gift of tongues.
Yeah.
Okay, so and this is for me a key that unlocks all sorts of things. So, and it sheds light on the day of Pentecost. Paul says in 1 Corinthians that tongues are not a sign for believers, but for unbelievers.
Yeah.
Okay, and J.B. Phillips, in his translation of the New Testament, actually switched that because he couldn't make any sense of it. He thought it was a typo. So he thought tongues are a sign for believers. But Paul says tongues are a sign for unbelievers. So what he's saying is that when Pentecost happened and the streets of Jerusalem were full of people speaking in strange tongues, Paul's saying this is Isaiah 28.
Yeah.
And it's go back to the days of the Cold War. If a prophet was prophesying to America and we wouldn't listen and we wouldn't listen, and he says, very well then, maybe you'll understand it in Russian. Okay, when your streets are full of soldiers speaking Russian, maybe then you'll know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, well that's what the gift of tongues was in the New Testament. It was a sign of judgment on Jerusalem. So, and Paul is very explicit in 1 Corinthians 14, and I think it sheds light on Acts 2, and it's sort of like one of those things where it snaps together and you go, oh, click, 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 all over the scriptures.
Yeah. So you would have, similar with the Isaiah 7 prophecy, you have an anticipatory fulfillment of this when the Babylonians come and destroy Jerusalem. And then what's happening at Pentecost is a Christological fulfillment of it. But you need to understand the original categories to understand what Paul is doing, what God is doing. And it's not just Babel that's being picked up. There's something more going on.
There's another verse, and I hesitate now. There we go. Here, I found it. I was going to say, this is one of my favorite verses that I can't find.
It's in there somewhere.
It's in there. It's Isaiah 25. And this is one of the things that Isaiah is so good at. I said earlier, it's like a box of pearls. So even if you don't know, if you read Isaiah just sitting loose, just looking for moments of blessing, there are places that you say, man, I don't know where this fits. But isn't it great? Isn't it great? This is Isaiah 25. On this mountain, the Lord of hosts will make for all peoples a feast of rich food, a feast of well-aged wine, of rich food full of marrow, of aged wine well refined. And he will swallow up on this mountain the covering that is cast over all peoples, the veil that is spread over all nations. He will swallow up death forever, and the Lord God will wipe away tears from all faces, and the reproach of his people he will take away from all the earth. For the Lord has spoken. It will be said on that day, behold, this is our God. We have waited for him, that he might save us. Now, this is a good example. This is, I think, a glorious prophecy of the days of the New Covenant, of the postmillennial vision. But when you look at the hardship of Isaiah's ministry, and then look at some of the glorious high points of declarations of great faith, God will wipe away tears from all faces. Right. So some of the best expression is the lion lying down with the lamb, and the kids having to be told not to play in the cobras, don't bother the cobras. Those sorts of visions are Isaianic. So he's seeing these things. He really is a seer. He sees something in human history that is emphatically not going on in his day.
So let's talk about eschatology and Isaiah, because this is a book that unlocks a lot, whether that's the Olivet Discourse and understanding the, as you call it, collapsing solar system language. And then also when you read Revelation and those final chapters that are describing what a lot of people take as the eternal state, I mean, they're is really just quoting straight out of Isaiah.
Yeah.
And you alluded to one about, the wolf dwelling with the lamb and the children being able to play. So let's start with the Olivet Discourse.
Okay.
How does Isaiah give us interpretive tools for understanding that passage?
Perfect. If you look at Luke 17 and Mark 13 and Matthew 24, and what Jesus is saying. Jesus says they're walking through the temple complex, which was over 30 acres. It was huge. And the disciples are rubbernecking. Look at that, look at that, look at that. And then Jesus says, do you see all this? Not one stone is going to be left on another. This whole thing's going to be flattened. And then the disciples come to him and say, when's this going to happen? Okay? And in the discourse afterwards, in Matthew 24, Jesus quotes Isaiah. Okay? And one of the things he says is, he quotes Isaiah 13:10. And what he says is, the stars of the heavens and their constellations will not give their light. The sun will be dark at its rising, and the moon will not shed its light. This is called decreation language, or I call it collapsing solar system language. And there's another passage just like this later on in Isaiah 34, but with a different referent. Okay, now this kind of collapsing solar system, Jesus is quoting Isaiah. Okay, but there's language like it in Joel and Ezekiel and in Amos. So decreation language is a prophetic sort of commonplace. But Isaiah uses it twice in 13 and 34. So if you put your finger on verse 10 and then you back up to the beginning of the chapter to find out what Isaiah is talking about, it says, 13:1, the oracle concerning Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amos saw. So when Isaiah is talking about verse 10, Isaiah is talking about Babylon. Now, by the time of Jesus, Babylon is already desolate. It's already a haunt of owls and jackals. It's already gone. So verse 10 has already been fulfilled with regard to Babylon. Okay, but
moon still comes up.
But the physical moon comes up. And this is what throws a lot of Christians, because they say, the Bible's the Word of God, it's got to be true. And then I have this, the sun going out and the moon going out and the stars falling. And so I go out and look at the night sky, and they're all still there. And so I think, well, that has to be fulfilled still in our future. But when Jesus was talking, it had been fulfilled regarding Babylon in Jesus' past. But the sun, moon, and stars were all still functioning. And that is the clue that throughout the Old Testament, decreation language always refers to the destruction of a nation or a city. All right. So in Isaiah 34, it's talking about Edom, the destruction of Edom. Here, it's talking about the destruction of Babylon. In Ezekiel, it's talking about the destruction of Egypt. In Joel, it's talking about the destruction of Israel. In Amos, it's talking about the destruction of northern Israel. It's always the prophet saying to a kingdom or a king or a nation, your lights are going to go out. Okay. Now so then the disciples come to Jesus in Matthew 24 and say, so when's this flattening of Jerusalem going to happen that you're talking about? And so Jesus tells them, and in the course of it, he quotes Isaiah. Right? Well, and then he says at the tail end, this generation will not pass away until all these things have been fulfilled. So what he's saying is what happened to Babylon is going to happen to Jerusalem within one generation. And he said that around 30 AD, and it happened in 70 AD. Within one generation.
I think maybe I've heard you mention, is it Tacitus that describes some of these actual cosmological events?
Josephus and Tacitus both. So Josephus was actually a general in the Jewish revolt that led up to the destruction of Jerusalem. He was, I think, up in Galilee and surrendered early. He sort of saw which way... It's kind of complicated, but there were various factions in the rebellion against Rome. And some of the people, according to Josephus, were just beyond wicked, wicked. And so Josephus surrenders early and then sort of becomes a court historian on the Roman side.
Yeah.
Right? Some would call him a turncoat, but other people might say he was a decent man who didn't want to go.
He's trying to broker peace in some ways.
I think he was a decent man who saw how wicked some of the rebels were.
Yeah.
So Josephus describes some remarkable events surrounding the destruction of Jerusalem. And Tacitus, a pagan Roman historian, does the same. Armies in the sky, for example. And Tacitus is not going off of anything scriptural. He's just saying, I've heard these reports.
Yeah. It's kind of remarkable when you look at, you just pull up the flags that are current of the nations right now, and you see how many of them have either sun, moon, star on them.
That's a great point.
As much as we are materialists that deny heaven has anything to do with the earth.
That's a really good point. Our flag has 50 stars.
Yeah, so it would be like Isaiah coming on the scene and saying, your 50 stars are going to fall from heaven.
Your stars are going to fall off the flag.
Yeah. One of the other things that I find somewhat challenging when you read these prophecies is you're like, okay, this is glorious, but when is he talking about? And one example would be this. So let's go to Isaiah 65.
All right.
This is my favorite. This is the verse that made me post mill after I was mill for 5 minutes. So this is Isaiah 65 verses 17 and following. So he says, "For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former shall not be remembered or come to mind." And then jumping down to verse 20, he says, "No more shall an infant from there live but a few days, nor an old man who has not fulfilled his days. For the child shall die 100 years old, but the sinner being 100 years old shall be accursed." And then it goes on to describe some glorious promises about vineyards and houses. So we're talking about new heavens and new earth in some sense, and then a child dying at 100 and a sinner dying at 100. But I thought people don't die in the new heavens and new earth. How are we supposed to understand this passage?
Okay, very good. So this is one of the glaringly obvious things about it. In fact, years ago, I was talking to a friend who was working through these issues, and we were in my office, and the door was open, and I had another colleague down the hall. And my friend that was working through these things said, "But what do people do in the new heavens and new earth?" And my colleague down the hall yelled, "They die!" All right, so after the resurrection, in the eternal state, there is no death. Yeah. There is no sorrow. There aren't.
It's been swallowed up, as we read. Yeah.
So this is not the eternal state.
Right.
Okay. The new heavens and the new earth. This is my understanding. The new heavens and the new earth were inaugurated at Pentecost. Mm-hmm. The old heavens and the old earth, the old Judaic aeon, came to a great climactic end in the destruction of Jerusalem, meaning that the two ages overlapped.
Yeah.
So it was sort of like a baton exchange in a relay race. Mm-hmm. So one age is coming to an end, and the other age is starting up.
Yeah.
And during that baton exchange, there are some things that are tolerated, right, that are belonging to the old order, belonging to the new order.
Yeah.
So, for example, when Paul comes to Jerusalem, he takes a Nazirite vow, and he pays the expenses of some people who've taken a Nazirite vow, and the process that involved an animal sacrifice.
Yeah.
Right. So it was. The temple was still operational. The temple was still conducting sacrifices. The author of Hebrews says that it's fading away.
Yeah.
Or it's fading away, but the baton exchange is still going on.
Yeah.
So the new heavens and the new earth are inaugurated at Pentecost. The old heavens and the old earth come to this sudden, drastic end in 70 A.D.
Yeah.
And it's like the people of Israel coming out of Egypt, spending 40 years in the wilderness. Mm-hmm. The new age has dawned because they're out of Egypt.
Yeah.
The new age, the old age has not yet started.
Yeah. They haven't taken the land, and
they're still in the wilderness.
Yeah.
So what are we? Are we in the new age or the old age?
Yeah.
Well, the answer that Moses would give is both. You're in the wilderness.
Yeah.
This is the baton exchange. So, and just as they were there for 40 years, so the New Testament church was there for 40 years. The New Testament, I think the entire New Testament was written between 30 and 70 A.D.
Yeah.
during that period of time. And so the new heavens and the new earth launch, and then we're completely into the new heavens and the new earth by year 200 A.D., and we're still in that now.
Yeah.
The new heavens and the new earth are going to come to their glorious end at the second coming. So Jesus ascended into heaven, and the Lord said to my Lord, Psalm 110, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool.
Yeah.
So how long will Jesus be seated at the right hand of the Father? Well, until all his enemies are made his footstool, with one exception, and that is death. So death, the person who's considered accursed when he dies at 100, death is not yet conquered.
Right.
Death is cornered. Death is subdued.
Yeah.
Death is restrained, because when someone dies when they're 100, we say, "Oh, what a long, fruitful life!"
Yeah.
Right. Well, I'm living with my dad now, who's 93, and if he goes to be with the Lord, he's ready.
Yeah.
He's lived a long life. He's gathered to his people.
Yeah.
But in the new heavens and the new earth, when they come into their fulfillment, when someone dies at 100, everybody's going to be walking around for weeks afterwards saying, "It's such a shame. Cut off in his prime."
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But he still dies.
Right.
So that means that this guy who dies, that means Jesus is still seated at the right hand of the Father.
Yeah.
Because when Jesus comes, he's going to destroy the last enemy, death.
Yeah.
And
he-
the destruction is going to be complete.
Right. Yeah, there's kind of two metaphors that I found helpful. One would be the new heavens and new earth are almost like on a dimmer rather than just a flip switch. And Jesus is going to say, I'm the light of the world, you are the light of the world. And as people are joined to Christ, who is the new creation, it reminds me of that moment in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe where they're
Turning stone creatures.
Yeah, they're turning all these stone creatures. Well, they're, in principle, it is Aslan's country, and now they're just waking people up.
Right.
The other thing that I think is really helpful is understanding what the temple is, where the temple is a mini cosmos. It has the heavens in it, and that destruction of the temple when Babylon destroys it was the end of an aeon, of that cosmos. And any time, whether it was building the tabernacle, building the temple, building the second temple, and then when God comes and destroys it, he is destroying a world when the temple is. And
that's a very good point. So when he destroys the temple, it's sort of a stand-in proxy for that whole world that is going under.
Yep.
Right. And that also, interestingly, and this might seem like a random thought dragged in by the ears, but I don't think so. If you talk to an educated, biblically literate Seventh-day Adventist who says, "What are you worshiping on Sunday for?" And then he takes a bunch of verses out of the Old Testament and wraps them around your neck, because where God says, "The Sabbath is forever. The seventh day is my day."
Yeah.
It's never going to, as long as the sun and moon are going, the Sabbath is it.
Yeah.
And he's going to say, "What about this?"
Yeah.
Well, I would say nothing would suffice to move the Lord's Day, the fourth commandment.
Yeah.
Nothing would suffice to move observance of that from the seventh day to the first day, short of a new creation.
Yeah.
If it's not a new heavens and a new earth, then we don't get to stop worshiping on the Sabbath.
Right.
It's got to be a new cosmos.
Yeah.
And the fact that the early church switched from seventh-day observance to worshiping on the Lord's Day without a controversy.
Yeah.
There have always been a handful of groups here and there, but the mainstream of the church switched over to worshiping on the Lord's Day, and these were faithful Jews. So when Peter is invited in the vision to kill and eat the unclean animals, he shows us how pious he'd been his whole life.
Yeah.
I've never tasted unclean flesh. He's a faithful, observant Jew.
Yeah.
And yet they all move over to first day worship, and it's clear that the resurrection of Jesus for them inaugurated this new world is a world in which a man has come back from the dead.
Yeah.
The old world didn't have that.
Yeah. Yeah, it is huge when you think about what happens on the Lord's Day, like we go to heaven, and that is part of the recreation process. Every 7 days, there is this renewal that's happening. While we're on the subject of eschatology, I want to talk about Isaiah 24, which some have maybe called like a mini apocalypse of sorts. And so here's another section that it begins with, "Behold, the Lord makes the earth empty, makes it waste, distorts its surface." Down in verse 19, "The earth is violently broken, the earth is split open, the earth is shaken exceedingly, the earth shall reel to and fro like a drunkard." So you have this judgment apocalyptic language. How do you situate this within the rest of the book?
Okay, so I take, let's see, is this the drunkards of Ephraim? No, maybe that's 28. So I'd put 24 as basically in the same world as 28.
Okay.
Okay, where Isaiah is addressing the corruptions of Israel in his day. Okay, but it's sort of like Moses doing the same thing in the Song of Moses. The corruptions of his day are typological of the way it's going to be.
Yeah.
Right. So I think Isaiah 24, Isaiah 28, and these severe judgments, Isaiah has people, names and faces that he could identify in his time that are representative of this. But this doesn't stop being true.
Right. Yeah.
Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
One of the other there's so many places I want to go, but I'll just pick one. So let's go to Isaiah 42, and we'll end with Jesus because we should. So this is a remarkable passage, and in some ways this is probably the most explicit portrait that we have of what Jesus is, what he's going to be like. It says, "Behold, my servant whom I uphold, my elect one in whom my soul delights. I have put my spirit upon him. He will bring forth justice to the Gentiles. He will not cry out, nor raise his voice, nor cause his voice to be heard in the street. A bruised reed he will not break, a smoking flax he will not quench. He will bring forth justice for truth. He will not fail, nor be discouraged, till he has established justice in the earth, and the coastlands shall wait for his law." And it keeps going on, and it kind of climaxes in Isaiah 53 and so forth. Tell us a little bit about these prophecies of Jesus and how they can kind of help us understand who he is.
Okay, so this would be basically the suffering servant stretch. And unbelieving scholars or Jewish scholars have a problem. For Christians, this is clearly the Lord, and it culminates in Isaiah 53, which is manifestly the Lord Jesus. By his stripes we're healed, and so on. But if it's not Jesus, let's say you're trying to navigate this with, okay, anybody but Jesus. Who are the candidates?
Yeah.
And one of the principal candidates that you'll see with unbelieving commentators is Israel. Okay, so Isaiah is looking forward to the time when Israel finally gets its act together. And suffer, instead of being impudent and rebellious and that sort of thing, Israel finally enters into maturity and is persecuted for it. And so Israel is the suffering servant. Okay. And then they try to interpret everything that way. Now, for Christians, a Christian doesn't have to deny that, because I think it is talking about Israel. But the whole point is that Christ is Israel. So Christ is the new Israel. Christ is Israel finally doing it right. And then everyone who believes in him becomes included in Christ and becomes part of that Israel.
It's like you're his body.
And that's exactly what Paul teaches in Ephesians. We're his body, the fullness of him who fills everything in every way. So we are we who are servants of the servant, servants of the suffering servant, are included in him, and we become the true Israel. Right?
So I'm glad you went there. So this connects with what happens in Isaiah 5, where, so this is Isaiah 5:7, "For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah are his pleasant plant. He looked for justice, but behold oppression, for righteousness, but behold a cry for help. And this whole chapter is about God plants this vineyard. He's like, I want some good grapes from it, but I got wild grapes.
Right.
And then he says, oh, by the way, this vineyard is Israel. And if you are a thoughtful reader, Jesus talks a lot about vines and vineyards, tells some parables about it. There's like 5 different parables on it.
Yeah.
And so just riff on that for a moment.
So if we had, if I'm talking to Americans and I tell them a story or parable that includes alabaster cities and bald eagles and stars and stripes, and
hot dogs and
hot dogs
baseball.
and hot dogs and baseball, that it'd be very few people who didn't know what I was talking about. This is clearly America, right? Well, it's that way in Israel. Israel is the vineyard. Is the Lord's. Israel is the Lord's vineyard. Another image would be olive tree. Another image would be fig tree.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have these sorts of representatives of who the Jews are. And in Isaiah, you have I said earlier, there's not a narrative arc, but there are very strikingly different scenes.
Yeah.
There's scenes of judgment and rebellion and the drunkards of Ephraim puking on the table. And, it's just very vivid. And then you've got these glorious pictures of the ships of Tarshish coming into, sailing into the New Jerusalem. And you say, man, it's like this high, lofty, exalted, exuberant vision coupled with these dark visions, and both of them are Israel. Right. Well, what's the key, or what's the transformation point? And for Christians, that transformation point is the Christ, the Messiah. So the Messiah who came to deliver Israel from the first condition, their rebellious condition, it didn't just do it right and then leave. He did it right and offered to include all of us in him.
Well, everyone pretty much knows about the fruit of the Spirit, or Jesus says, abide. How many women's Bible studies are called abide? What does this mean? It's all about bearing fruit, and a lot of people forget that whole concept has been developing in the Old Testament, especially in Isaiah. And so could you just close by giving people kind of a final word of advice for navigating, reading this book?
Right. So I would say, don't try to thread the pearl necklace. I would say just read. Now, read it like you're reading the book of Proverbs. Okay, so you're letting each passage. Let each passage speak to you. The thought. The thought groupings. Right. Let each passage speak to you, and it's not to say that they don't tie together, but you're not going to be able to tie them together accurately the first time through. The first time through, you're just going to be going, what? What happened? Why was there a scene change? Who's this guy? It's going to be that sort of thing. So I would just encourage you to read it, cut it up in small portions. This is a rich steak, and a very big one. Cut it up into small bite-sized portions and just enjoy each bite, savor each bite. And there'll be plenty there for you to feed off of and be blessed by without understanding the big picture. Okay? I'm not sure anybody understands Isaiah from 50 yards out. Right?
It reminds me, sometimes we have a little arboretum here, and you can walk through the arboretum, and unless you walk through it in like kind of every season, you're missing stuff, and it takes walking through it over and over and over again till you kind of understand what the different plants are, and you can stop and stare at a single tree or a single flower for a long time. And with the Bible Reading Challenge, you're going fairly fast, and so we'd say it's okay. You know that there's more going on, but it's totally okay. You're gonna, hopefully, Lord willing, be back through this many more times. That's
a good illustration, and it's like, if one of the blessings of the Bible Reading Challenge is that if I'm going at this rate, I feel like I didn't get that, or I missed that. But it's like driving through scenic part of the country, and you've got to get to Seattle by thus and such a time.
Yeah.
Well, it's okay since you're going to be doing this again.
Yeah.
Well, I'll look for that next time.
Yep.
I missed that mountain, or I missed that river, or I missed that. Okay, just keep going.
Yep.
Keep going, because we're going to drive this road a lot.
Yeah.
So when you're driving through Isaiah, enjoy it. Just relax and enjoy it.
Yeah.
And then let that be a motivation to do it again.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, up next, we got 1st and 2nd Kings. So until next time, keep on reading.